In December 2021, 6 families shared their stories with a parliamentary committee inquiring into New South Wales' proposed VAD legislation. All had witnessed loved ones suffer as they died. What they had to say was so confronting, committee members were left speechless. Some asked to leave the room. These are their voices.
And he was given 6 months to live and no treatment options were available. They looked all over the world and it was so bad that that was it. And Tom died 6 months and 2 weeks later after that diagnosis. So the oncologist knew exactly what they were talking about in terms of time. But Tom endured particularly terrible, prolonged and unbearable suffering in the last few weeks of his life. And I don't want this to happen to anybody else. It was just so terrible. And over those 6 months, every so often, his pain had become unbearable and they'd increase the medications, the morphine, etc., and it continued on like that till the last few weeks. About 2.5 weeks before he died, Tom said to us, his family, "I'm in unbearable pain all over my body. And I feel really, really sick and I'm ready to die and I want to die." And that option wasn't available to him. I feel that I have to give you some detail, and I won't spend too long, as to how he died, because unless I say it how it was, nothing's going to change. And I couldn't stand the thought of anybody else going through what Tom went through. I'm going to pass around some photos of Tom, which is a progression. Sorry to do this, but there are a lot worse ones than these, but it'll give you some idea. This is for the committee. There's my brother Tom when he was well. Because Tom had a facial cancer, it started to grow inwards and outwards. His jaw became terribly deformed and his face started dropping. He started to drool. This is months before he passed away, drool out of his mouth, and he had terrible, painful mouth ulcers. But Tom, being the person he was, assiduously followed a puree diet for the whole 6 months because his swallowing was so difficult from this cancer. So he had episodes of semi and unconsciousness throughout the 6 months where he'd lose control of his bowels and we'd find him on the floor of his unit, soiled. This is my older brother, my eldest brother, lying on the floor with his poo all around him because he lost control of his bowels. He became increasingly frightened and unable to do things that gave him pleasure, including watching his beloved Parramatta Eels. He loved the Rolling Stones and he stopped listening to the Rolling Stones. I honestly thought I'd never see that day. And the worst thing for him was he could no longer use his mobile phone or computer. He was perfectly with it up here, but he couldn't use his hands properly because of the effect of the nerves in his brain. He was moved from respite care to high care. He was given a pump for his medication and absolutely nothing alleviated his pain and suffering. It went on and on. And finally, his palliative care specialist and a GP came to his independent living unit and said, no, he needs to go to hospital, because they were trying everything to alleviate his suffering and nothing worked. So he ended up in hospital in his last week. And we thought the worst of it was at the independent living unit before he was transferred. We thought, thank heavens, he's being taken to a hospital and the suffering won't be so bad. Well, let me tell you, it was a whole lot worse in that final week. He groaned, he screamed, he moaned. He had my sister in our arms. This went on day and night, day after day, where he would squeeze them to the point where we had dents in our arms, and he only was able to utter 2 words that week. One was help and the other one was inhumane, and that last photo was when he was calling for help. The hospitals ran out of options in terms of trying to control his pain, and even one of the senior nurses said to me how upset they were about it. So they gave him a stress ball to bite down on while all this was going on day and night, day after day, night after night, and he ripped it apart with his teeth in about 5 seconds. So that's the level we were at. I just can't allow it to go on. I want the day to come where I know nobody else will go through that sort of suffering. If New South Wales had had the VAD legislation when Tom received his devastating diagnosis, he would have fitted squarely into that legislation. He would have at least had the comfort of knowing that sometime over that 6 months, if he needed to pass away with assistance, he could have. We couldn't give him that comfort. Neither we nor his doctors could give him that comfort. More importantly, Tom would have had to endure the extreme and relentless pain, pressure, discomfort and anxiety that he went through all that time.
So my partner Jade was diagnosed with cervical cancer in March 2017 and ended up dying in October 2018. So she lived for 18 months. She was stage 4 and we were told that she had 12 months to live from then. So it was like fairly downhill from there. She knew that this wasn't going to end very well. In her journey of having cancer, she met other people with her disease and with other types of cancers who had died horrible deaths, and she really, really did not want that to happen to her. In the last 6 months, her disease progressed so much, and the tumours in her body became so large that it impacted her on a daily basis. You know, she had up to like 5 kilos worth of fluid in her legs a day, which is immensely painful, and no pain relief can relieve that. Towards the end of her time, she wanted to die at home, and fortunately I was able to grant that wish for her and make that happen with the use of palliative care, which they were unbelievable, but again could not relieve all of Jade's suffering. Not only could her physical pain not be relieved, but her emotional and spiritual suffering could most definitely not be relieved at all. Jade's last week on this earth were nothing short of hell, not only for Jade but for her family and my family who were there to watch her leave. She was so dosed up on pain medication that she was hallucinating and thrashing around the bed, and she didn't know where she was or who we were or what was happening for her, which is immensely distressing, not only for her but for us. I'm going to give some gory details because, again, I think it's really important that you hear, because otherwise it's like I said, you guys can have all the paper and all the facts, but until you hear the actual things, you don't really know. So the tumour in her abdomen was so large that it was, impacting her ability to use the toilet. So she had a catheter in permanently to help her go to the toilet. And just want you to remember that we're talking about a 32-year-old woman. So permanent catheter in to help her go to the toilet because of the pain medication she was on, and because of the tumours, it was impacting her bowels so much that she was unable to go to the toilet that way, so she would end up vomiting her own feces on the regular. The way that her tumour was positioned in her body, when I would have to change her, parts of her tumour would fall out from underneath, fall out from her, which is horrendous for everyone involved, especially Jade, obviously. The tumour was so large in the back that it cracked her vertebrae. So in terms of her being in bed when we would have to move her so she wouldn't get bed sores, trying to roll her over, she would scream in absolute agony because of, cracked vertebrae, you could only imagine. Just having that comfort in the cupboard would have made the world of difference to Jade. Unfortunately for you guys, you didn't get to know Jade, but if you did know Jade, you would know that she was an incredible fighter, and she did not want to die. She wanted...
Take your time.
Yeah.
There's no pressure at all.
Yeah. Just want to get it out. She did not want to die, so she wanted to be here. So there's no way that she would have taken that medication to end her life had there been any other option, she only would have taken it to end her life at a point of no return. And she was at a point of no return. And the way that she was forced to leave this world is horrific. Like, it's just so unjust. And when, you know, you put the people that you love the most in these positions and you watch the way that they are forced to leave this world, it traumatizes you. I was 28 when Jade died. I'm 31 now, and it's never going to leave me. It's never going to leave her family. It's never going to leave my family. It will forever be etched in my memory that these are the last memories I have of the person who I love the most in the world. And that's not a true representation of who she was. And as hard as this is for me and the others to be here today, it's incredibly important. And I would do it all again, and Jade would do it all again if it meant that it would change the lives of other people, they didn't have to go through it anymore.
Laurie had MS. His pain was unending and intolerable. His treatment, care, and pain management didn't alleviate his agony. He had neuropathic pain, which in his circumstances was unstoppable. I was naive enough to think that the pain specialists, physiotherapists, neurologists, stem cell treatments, specialist GPs could help him. And they did. They were wonderful. They cared for him. The attention he got from his carers and from everyone was thoroughly admirable, and I thank them deeply. But the truth is that they couldn't really make any effect on his symptoms. He chose to end his suffering in September 2016 at the age of 51. He didn't get to have the peaceful death he spoke of, surrounded by those who loved him and that he loved. We lost him earlier than was necessary, as he was losing the use of his hands, and he felt he needed to take action quickly before paralysis took control. If voluntary assisted dying laws were in place, he would have had peace of mind and security in the knowledge that there was a caring, compassionate, and civilized end available to him. I've included the word civilized because surely this has to be one of the clearest indicators of a true civilization, how we as a society treat the ill and suffering, those who are tortured by pain and incurable symptoms. It's more compassionate to allow someone to say goodbye to their family. It's more humane to stop someone's pain. It's more civilized to let loved ones be supportive and involved. And ultimately, fear will be lessened, life may be extended, and damage will be considerably less for all concerned. I lost time with the love of my life, my best friend. My children missed out on precious experiences with their father. And Laurie missed seeing his pride and joy, his children growing into the wonderful people they are. He said, "There are some things worse than death." Now, I can't say how long he would have lived if he had not taken matters into his own hands, but I do know that the peace of mind that he would have had, the knowledge that he could have had someone in a caring and compassionate manner to give him something that would end his suffering, that would have made a difference, and we would have had him for longer.
Amal really genuinely loved life. He didn't want to die. He found he was positive and he was confident, and he always wanted to find fun and adventure. He was passionate about his soccer and sailing with his close super friends. He had a large family and he just loved the big meals and the getting together and the love that they created. We travelled a lot together, we rock climbed and we camped, and it was a really good life. And I got pregnant and it was really exciting. And we were ready to get old together with our little family. And 11 weeks later, he was diagnosed. I actually know a bit about MND because I did medical research in neurodegeneration. It's merciless. It's thought to be one of the worst neurodegenerative diseases, if you can say that, because he was 33 when he was diagnosed in 2016. Very quickly we learned what would happen, that it would progressively kill all of his muscle function through his body until his breathing muscles could no longer expand his lungs. His prognosis was about 3 years. He'd lose his mobility, the ability to stand on his own, the ability to hold his head up, to empty his bladder and bowels. He'd end up completely trapped within his body, 100% dependent, unable to talk, and increasingly struggling to breathe. And we knew that at the end he would be choking because his larynx and pharynx would collapse and he would inhale his saliva, most likely die from aspiration and pneumonia. We couldn't stop him dying this way. It was going to happen no matter what we did. But I think back to that time and I imagine what it would have meant to us if I could have just told him, if all that is too much, if it gets too frightening, or if you just can't breathe properly. It's your choice whether you have to cope with that or not. And I think that's my main story, in that it would have meant everything to that whole 3 years of dealing with the illness. My next main points are about how the current law is inadequate. We had terrible trouble with the existing law. Our palliative care physician, we knew, was against euthanasia, we were suspected, I think, of secretly planning euthanasia, and so it clouded all our conversations. There was one point where Amal couldn't breathe well when we were transferring him to the toilet because it was strenuous, and he had it's called non-invasive ventilation, which is a mask on his face to push air into his lungs. It wasn't sufficient anymore. He would get breathless, and so he needed morphine as well to take the edge off, to give him a baseline, because morphine removes that panic associated with breathlessness. There was a big power imbalance in our relationship with the palliative care team. There were a number of doctors who were excellent and the nurses were excellent, but we had a fraught relationship with the head of palliative care, who certainly caused us grief. We had a nurse advocating for us, and she told us she was, even though we were asking for relief, that she was having conversations with the head of palliative care. She was having long discussions and arguments with her, and she was trying to get us some relief, but it then took another 3 weeks for that physician to allow us to get morphine in the house, and then we were able to put him on a syringe driver, which means it slowly pumps a baseline level of morphine. I felt offended and upset that we were distrusted when I was trying to do the right thing, and I didn't know what to do, really. I was just trying to learn. The other situation where I feel there were power dynamics at play and our relationship with palliative care was hindered by the existing law is in our conversations of end of life. He had an episode where part of his lung must have collapsed or bled, and he couldn't breathe, and he was typing with his remaining finger, "knock me out," and pressing it on the iPad. But we didn't have the morphine in the house. we had a subcutaneous morphine, but it takes 20 minutes to act, so we gave it to him, but we had to sit through 20 minutes of him not being able to breathe. We talked to the palliative care team, and she went away and came back, and she said that what they can offer us is to wean him off his mask over a period of 2 weeks. So now this was end-stage disease, and so he had a non-invasive ventilation mask on 100% of the time so he could breathe. He couldn't take it off. If you took it off, he would probably die within about half an hour. We knew that he couldn't live without the machine. So really, to remove that treatment would have been a legal way to kill him, but he would need pain relief. But she came back and she said what we can offer is to wean him off over a couple of weeks. We said how. She said we would get a respiratory physician to increase the carbon dioxide slowly over a couple of weeks. And I said, what are you going to give him for pain relief? And she said, we can't accelerate his death, so we need to see that he's distressed before we give him pain relief. So they would need to take his mask off and wait for him to be slightly suffocating, I guess, to become distressed, and then they would give him some morphine. I asked if they could just give him more in anticipation of the fact that he would suffer from suffocation, seeing as we knew, and she said no, because that would be euthanasia. And I said, well, what's the difference really? It's just that you're stringing it out. I mean, he's already almost dead. Can't he just choose to go? But when I said that, she said, we are palliative care, which was it. It was designed to end the conversation, and I don't think that's where the conversation should have ended. I didn't see the logic. I was trying to understand, and it didn't make any sense. VAD would put the control in the patient's hands, which I don't think we should see doctors as having some sort of divine insight into someone's suffering and awareness of their suffering at end of life. I think doctors often really don't know what a person is experiencing, because we are all so vastly different. Any one person's response to things is different to another. There are so many different variables involved. A palliative care physician can't exactly know what that person is going to experience. I think that would, with voluntary assisted dying, it would be safe to put it in the patient's hands to decide, and not give you a sort of potluck as to what your palliative care physician is going to say and going to decide for you. When I look at the new law, I just see that it articulates well how things should be and protects the rights of the most vulnerable. That's all.
Tim was my husband. He was strong, he was smart, he was vital, he was challenging, he was also pretty good looking. He died of mesothelioma. He was the love of my life and my best friend. He wanted to go out on his own terms, having had a final wry and philosophical chat with each of us. But that's not what happened. In the final weeks of his life were horrendous for Tim and for his family. In the end, a cycle of intense suffering and incapacity. In that, Tim lost himself. And we lost Tim, the person, the husband, the dad, well before we lost Tim, the physical being. The really sad thing is that he knew it was happening, and his whole being was being consumed by the suffering. Tim accepted death, but not the way he died. He died angry and frustrated. He died disconnected and suffering in the extreme. So we didn't get to say goodbye to Tim, the person. We didn't get to have that last wry conversation that he so loved. We didn't get to help him pass well and peacefully. We felt like bystanders in a tragedy, and we all felt really badly that we'd let him down. The outcome of those weeks was a good man who died badly in slow motion, and a fractured family who could no longer relate to one another or get past the guilt of having let him down. 3 years later, we remain a fractured family. It's as if the kids have got some kind of PTSD and they don't know how to mend. So I guess I'm here today to say that it could have been really different. If there had been voluntary assisted dying, Tim could have and he would have chosen his moment in those last weeks when he was still himself and his family was still part of his universe. We had a similar experience with our palliative care team to Emma's. We had the lead doctor who was resistant to the discussion, let alone, and all we had to say was it was Tim's wish to die peacefully. And I can remember sitting at the kitchen table with my children, getting a very long lecture about we had no right to do anything. We hadn't suggested doing anything. That he was strong and he could be around for a long time, and it was her job to make sure that happened. After that particular conversation and the way she handled Tim, I had to tell our GP, who was excellent, by the way, that we did not want to see them again. We both respected, and I continue to respect, that voluntary assisted dying isn't for everyone. I myself was raised a Catholic, so I understand that some religious beliefs believe that suffering is a pathway to God. But I ask that those views and beliefs not be imposed on those that don't share them. I ask that the Tims of this world who are going to die anyway be allowed to die in a way that gives them some peace and their loved ones some way forward. And finally, I ask that we construct a law that protects the dying, but doesn't add a layer of difficulty that increases the suffering to an already intolerable situation.
These were wrongful deaths, tortured, traumatic deaths that could have been avoided. Deaths that have left behind a trail of emotional wreckage. They are just 6 of many catalogued in the state of suffering. Until VAD is law in New South Wales and control given back to the person who is terminally ill, they will continue. New South Wales MPs, please protect our vulnerable who are dying. Legalise VAD.